As a reporter, I have a confession to make. I should have pushed harder earlier for more information about Joe Biden's mental and physical well-being and any signs of decline. So let me explain. Joe Biden was president from 2020 to 2024. I worked at CNN through 2022. During that time, the early part when I was at CNN, 2020 to 2022, Republicans would regularly ping me and say, why don't you ask more questions of Joe Biden and how he's doing? He's 76, 77, 78-year-old man. And I would sort of brush them off because what I would say is, well, there's no obvious evidence that he's declining. Yeah, he moves a little slower, he talks a little slower, but there's no evidence that he's declining. And the White House and the people around Joe Biden were absolutely adamant that suggesting anything, asking the question about whether he was in some physical, mental, or both decline was offensive. How could you? It's age shaming. And I think that impacted me at some level because while I did ask the question from time to time of, not directly the White House, but aides and people around in that orbit, I didn't really push on it, if I'm being honest.
But no one is saying they have to shut down the White House because he's not with it today. This man is awake 23 hours a day. He's clearly engaged. And the American people just elected him over somebody who was much younger. I will point out to you. My question is this. That we elect people for a reason. The elected leadership of the government is supposed to be making decisions. For 4 years, the unelected have been in charge of our country during critical moments. Mm-hmm. We don't live in a country where the unelected are supposed to rule us. We live where the elected are supposed to rule. My problem is for 4 years, we were lied to about who's actually running the country. This is a problem.
I think we do have to leave it there.
And when I got to the White House 4 years ago with President Biden, he was walled off because of COVID. They didn't want him to get sick. But then he stayed walled off. And now the Wall Street Journal has this item with the headline, How the White House Functioned with a Diminished Biden in Charge. And it comes with this quote, if the president was having an off day, meetings could be scrapped altogether. On one such occasion in the spring of 2021, a national security official explained to another aide why a meeting needed to be rescheduled. Quote, he has good days and bad days, and today was a bad day, so we're going to address this tomorrow, the former aide recalled the official saying. The president showed natural signs of aging, but key allies always stuck their necks out to say, no big deal.
Right after the debate, you insisted that President Biden is extraordinarily strong. Given where we are now, do you have any regrets about what you told the American people?
No, not at all. Not at all.
I talk to President Biden, regularly, usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years.
Well, do you think the president should undergo some sort of cognitive testing?
To the extent that we're having this conversation, I don't see any need to do that as it relates to Biden.
Things have changed a lot, but no obvious second thoughts.
You prepare to leave the White House. Any other regrets that you have? Anything you wish you would have done differently?
Well, I guess if I thought a lot about it, it'd be something I would done specifically done, but not generically.
I had a front row seat to a lot of this, and at various times was basically told not to believe what I was seeing or hearing. The president misspoke. The president has a cold. But now the dam appears to be breaking. This Wall Street Journal item interviewed 50 people familiar with Biden's operation. Back to you.
So, Peter, you had this story in August. The Wall Street Journal began to dip their toe in the water on this very topic, and they got blasted. You've gotten blasted when you've questioned the president's acuity. And Kamala Harris offended that people even bring it up. But they talk about interaction between Biden and many of his cabinet members were infrequent, often tightly scripted. At least one cabinet member stopped requesting calls with the president because it was clear that such requests wouldn't be welcome. The cabinet. Peter Doocy can't get an interview. His own cabinet can't get a meeting. Adam Smith who's chairman of Armed Services, tried to tell the president how bad Afghanistan could turn out. He couldn't get to him. This is cataclysmic.
And it raises a lot of questions about who was making key decisions. You mentioned the Afghanistan withdrawal. If the president was as diminished as this story makes it sound, that would be a huge problem, and it could explain why certain decisions were made that turned out to be catastrophic and why no apologies were ever made. To your point, Brian, when the cabinet met all 9 times, which is the least in the last several decades that a president has had their whole cabinet together in an entire term, there was a different item a few months ago where cabinet secretaries were being asked to submit their questions for the president behind closed doors in advance, and they were being told to keep it quick because the way that it worked was they would ask a question that was pre-screened, and then the president would have a card with the answer, even in a closed setting. And I hear a lot of the complaints about, and there was a bite in the open, why wasn't there more coverage of the president's age and acuity earlier? Well, a lot of the stories that you hear...
You kept asking.
I kept asking the whole time. And a lot of the stories that we would hear, that we would try to report out, are secondhand, but it's a lot of stuff like, you would hear from somebody on the staff or somebody that works at the White House. It looked like the president was falling asleep somewhere. Okay, hard to confirm that, but we have tape of him falling asleep at events, Peter, as recently as his most recent foreign trip.
You know, it was off the record last Friday. There was a holiday party at the White House. You had a brief interaction that has not been reported, and it kind of speaks to how his aides just ripped you essentially out of that room when you two started talking.
It was actually kind of funny. I took my sister Mary as my +1, and when we got up there, I said, "Mr. President, this is my sister Mary." And the first thing he said to her is, "You know, my sister tries to control me." And the First Lady and the press secretary, who was standing off to the side, were trying to keep the line going, and they did. And so it was quick.
Thanks, Peter.
This is embarrassing as a country. I mean, everyone's talking about the Republican Party right now and who's debating this bill, and Elon Musk, who's running the country right now. And the fact is that the report said this was months into the presidency. That means, as we reported back then, when I was Sean Hannity's correspondent and I used to go in front of Joe Biden's house during the campaign trail, that it wasn't about COVID, that he was diminished before he even was sworn in. It only got worse as he was in office. So, I mean, I don't understand how they have any credibility anymore.
This is so serious, and it is such a big deal because if this was going on when he was making decisions about the Afghanistan withdrawal, how do you think you would feel if you're the parents that lost a child at the Abbey Gate? Exactly.
Who decided? How about they fought for 20 years in a war? They fought for the right reason, and to build a society that had somewhat representation of women and people who have opportunity. I think that this disqualifies Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer, Kamala Harris, KJP. They all lied to us. They told us he was fine. They campaigned to get him another 4 years until he fell apart in June. And they hid this from the country. This is so beyond politics. Our country had no legitimate president.
The entire time.
Functioning
and
government.
It's not the only lie.
And Jill.
Yeah. And the Wall Street Journal says it started on day 1 of his presidency.